When the Maytime rolls around, tulips grace the ground. Lovely colors everywhere make the town look fair. Now we wish you'd lend an ear to hear what we've to say. For in Holland every year it's tulip time in May. Oh, we greet you each and everyone at Tulip time. Come and join us, enter in the fun at Tulip time. For
You bet. Tulip time in Holland. Something to sing about. A confluence of nature, heritage, and springtime. And when everything happens just right, it's a feast for the eyes and the other senses.
Down the tulip lane.
The song Tulip Time in Holland is an old recording of Margaret Van Viven warbling about the glories of the season.
And I don't know how I happened to write that, but I just felt inspired to do it. And the kids loved that song. They all sang it in school and it made me happy. I was sitting there at this radio station and I was just singing it, but the boys up there in the station made a record of it, and I didn't know it.
Margaret was a music teacher when she wrote that song some 60 years ago. That would have been about 10 years after the start of Tulip Time.
I started out when Tulip Time started out in the 30s. I guess it was about 1930 when it started. So I was right at the beginning, and I always did the street scrubbing too. One year I scrubbed, and I happened to scrub right in the same row with the governor of the state.
Margaret and her song are just a few of the treasures that have gathered with the history of this town's most special festival. At the center of it all, miles and miles of tulips in all their wondrous variety. It's a recognized condition called tulip mania. So why exactly is this sturdy little flower that's native to Asia promoting Dutch heritage on the shores of Lake Michigan? The tulip spread east and west from its native mountainsides in the Near East, but on its own, it came nowhere close to the Netherlands. No, that happened as a result of the Ottoman Empire. The Turks had been cultivating the flower since about the year 1000 AD, and as they swept through Europe, they brought their favorite flower with them, a flower shaped like a little turban. In their language, turban was tuliban. The name went from tuliban to Latin tulipa, finally to tulip. 1593 marks the beginning of Dutch tulip history. Carolus Clusius was the head botanist at the University of Leiden. He planted a bunch of the bulbs that had been sent to him by a friend in Constantinople. For Clusius, they were a botanical oddity. But some people who saw them wanted them. They offered to buy the bulbs. No thanks, said Clusius. The would-be purchasers eventually resorted to theft, and that was the beginning of the Dutch tulip industry. Soon the bulbs were selling for phenomenal prices. In one case, 4,500 guilders, plus a horse and carriage. That would have been more than $2,000 for a single bulb. Most prized were the multicolored flowers. As sometimes happens, desire outran common sense. Soon there was speculation in the market and, well, fraud. With it came the cataclysmic tulip crash of 1637. Oh, there were still tulips to be had, but at more modest prices. To the Dutch, though, they were still plenty dear. We don't know with certainty that the Dutch immigrants who came to settle their new Holland in 1847 brought tulips with them. Certainly they brought everything else they had, but that wasn't much. These 101 Dutch were the poorest of the poor. They were seeking a new land where they might fare better and where, under their leader, Albertus C. van Raalte, they might pursue their own strict brand of Calvinism.
At the time they arrived here, it was an economic question, a situation. And since many of these Afscheiding separatist people were coming to America, Van Raalte envisioned himself as a leader. Rather than having these people just becoming absorbed in the general American population, he wanted them to be gathered into congregations. Therefore, he says, I will found a colony here on the shores of Lake Michigan. I don't think Holland, Michigan would have succeeded without the faith basis, because that's the only thing I think kept them going in those very early difficult years when this land had to be cleared, and the settlement and the illness, and a lot of this area was swampy. There was just so much sickness and the tremendous price, because these words are used many times in America. Settlements are built on the bones of settlers. And that was true here of Holland, Michigan.
The little town they founded on the shores of what was then Black Lake grew. There were terrible challenges. Malaria from the swamps, a harbor mouth that was too shallow for commercial shipping, a fire that devastated the community and nearly put it under. But there were successes, too. A new school that grew into Hope College, now one of the country's leading liberal arts institutions.
The town-gown relationship has been very, very strong. In fact, I oftentimes think about the things that we have done together in partnership that have been significant. I'm not sure there's another community that has quite as much commitment to the welfare of the other entity as Hope and Holland have toward each other.
And from Hope, there grew a school to supply pastors in the Reformed Church in America, Western Theological Seminary. There were newspapers, some in Dutch, rail service, industry, wonderful farming, and natural resources that served to attract people. Though the early town was pretty much Dutch, and stayed that way until World War II, there was a lot of contact with the traveling public. Much of it centered around Holland's Tulip time. And that all happened because of a good idea by a very determined high school biology teacher. Lyda Rogers suggested that as a civic project, Hollanders might plant flowers. Seemed reasonable, so the next year off went an order to the Netherlands for bulbs. Despite the crash of 1637, those Dutch were and are still pretty much in the business. So people planted bulbs, 100,000 of them that first fall, up and down the streets, in parks, everywhere you could push one in the ground. That first year had to have been something, because by 1930, the city was advertising Tulip Time, and 50,000 visitors showed up. They must have been impressed. The next year, 175,000 arrived to look, and it grew from there. By 1938, there were 500,000 people wandering the streets. Miss Rogers was still very much involved with the flowers during the years of World War II. The festival was suspended then, but there were still tulips to plant, and no men to plant them. At least, that's what Don Postma remembers.
Lyda solved that problem, or at least with help she solved it. The school kids did it. We broke into teams and went out, and each took a section of blocks. And the boys would dig, and the girls would either pull up the bulbs or plant new ones. And it took 4 days to do this, 2 in the fall, 2 in the spring. The reason I think some of us remember it so acutely is because, as any good school district would have it, these were not 4 days that were just regularly taken off the end of the schedule then. We had to make them up.
After the war, the festival resumed, and the crowds have grown ever since. So what did those early visitors see when they came to Holland in May? Well, tulips, sure. But it took more than that to entertain them. The clever Hollanders dressed up and took to the ritual cleaning of the streets and klompen dancing. Klompen dancing? Just what it sounds like. Wooden shoes clomping on the pavement.
Wooden shoes are clomping. They make a clomping noise on the street. That's why they're called clomping, or wooden shoes. And they do break once in a while, but sometimes the dancers put too many socks inside. I usually wear like 5 or 6. And why you do that is because, see, your shoe doesn't give right here, and so you need that.
That's Barb Appledorn. She's been involved with Tulip Time and Dutch dancing since the early 60s. But Tulip Time was more than tulips and Dutch dancing. There were community productions, plays, concerts, skits, plenty of children's activities, and shows with big-name talent. Almost everybody in town was involved one way or another, with everything leading up to the big parades, the Volksparade, the Kinderparade, and the Music Parade. Swirling about them all were Dutch costumes. In the early years, the costumery was well-intentioned, but a little less than spectacular.
Remember the Dutch cleanser can? Okay, with a little checkered apron in that. Some of the costumes, they were copied after that. The little Dutch cleanser girl that was on the Dutch cleanser box. In fact, one year, if you get a picture of this, they scrubbed the streets with real Dutch cleanser, and it looks like this huge cloud that's coming up.
But as the festival matured, so did the desire to more accurately represent Dutch heritage. Locals researched and traveled, and they brought back the real things, dresses and designs from the Dutch provinces. Not that your family had to have come from Friesland or Overijssel to take part.
No, I wasn't Dutch dance. I'm very proud of that because I feel like that's part of it. And my pal Donna Hoogerheide, my best friend in high school, was my best friend, and she was the partner. She was a boy and I was a girl, and I was in this Isle of Marken costume.
Becky Arenas was one of the first of an influx of Latinos. Most of their families had come to work in the fields after the Second World War. Many of them liked the community, its schools, and the opportunity to find better work, so they stayed and became Dutch dancers too. It's not always been easy. When you take a town that's pretty much Dutch and within a half century introduce significant minority populations of Latinos, African Americans, and Asians, there are likely to be some strains. But Holland has made getting along a top priority.
As the time went on, more and more people came to live here. And so it became a bigger town, and we became less well known to each other. But it was a friendly town. Everybody seemed to accept their differences without being unkind to each other.
Now when you see folks in costume with the klompen and doing the high kicks, you see some Irishmen, you see some Hispanic, you see some Asian, and sometimes some people might scratch their heads and say, well, what is this? Is this a wrong message? I think it's the most wonderful message that there could possibly be. And that is, for several days in the month of May, we celebrate this community, all of us, recognizing Holland's original roots, and not afraid, if we don't happen to be Dutch, not afraid to put on those trappings of the Dutch culture. And to just do that together. When you look at the young people who are in the parade on Thursday and you see the rainbow of faces, the mayor thinks, what a wonderful image of Holland, Michigan.
These days, Tulip Time begins with Fiesta celebration and is shortly followed by Juneteenth. It's a celebration for anybody who wants to join in, including more than 1 million tourists who get to watch us clean up for the parade action. John Karsten gets things underway with an example of the ancient and honorable practice of town crying.
Town crying isn't Dutch, town crying is historic. So especially in Western Europe, every village and every settlement had a town crier. I think why America or the United States wasn't that familiar with it, because by the time America grew, the United States and the colonies, print was already prominent and most people could already read and write, or many more people. But before the 15th, 16th century, the average public couldn't read, and only the monk and then the people in the monastery.
Let it be known that again this year there will be a Tulip Festival in Holland, Michigan. And on Wednesday, we will have the usual folks parade. But the streets probably are dirty, and therefore they must be scrubbed.
I'll have on my wooden shoes and my Dutch costume at just the right time to say the streets are dirty, and I hereby ask all of our residents to grab water and brooms and make them Dutch clean.
We've been scrubbing these streets for decades, with a lot of help. And by tradition, even the governor shows up to grab a broom. With clean streets, it's time for a parade, complete with a grand marshal. Notables have included President Gerald R. Ford, Congressman Guy Vanderjagt, Barbara Bush, and Queen Juliana of the Netherlands. And throughout the celebration, there's all the Dutch dancing anybody's little heart could desire. The Klompen Stompen really started as an activity for high schoolers from Holland and the surrounding communities.
10th, 11th, and 12th graders from the 5 area high schools. Originally, it was just Holland High. That was the original school that did it. Then West Ottawa, then Holland Christian, Zeeland, and Hamilton. We might kick a little bit higher, which Americanizes it a little bit more. But steps in the dance are authentic. It's an authentic American folk dance, if you want to get to it like that.
The kids start months in advance, and it's even a letter sport, like track or football, Klompen dancing. The dancers, at least an exhibition team of them, have been known to travel the land to the amazement of onlookers.
I took a Dutch dance group to New York City, and we danced for the opening of the KLM Airlines there, and for Princess Beatrix at the time. She's now Queen Beatrix, but she was Princess Beatrix at the time. So, I mean, they still are people that hold on to this tradition. It has to be because we dance all over like that. Very exciting.
So, which is the biggest thrill? The dancing? The tulips? Well, before you decide, you better check out De Zwaan. It's one more must-see, this time on Windmill Island. The whole island is worth seeing and hearing, but De Zwaan, a meticulously restored 200-plus-year-old Dutch windmill, is the jewel in the crown. But it begs the question, how did a group of Holland Michiganians talk the Dutch government out of one of its national treasures for $2,800?
The Willard Wickers would go over to the Netherlands to visit very frequently. So frequently that he became a real good friend to the Queen there in the Netherlands. And then he got the idea, as he looked around at all those beautiful windmills there, that it would be nice for Holland, Michigan, to have such a windmill. So he asked if they could do that, have a windmill sent to the city of Holland. And they said, sure, we can arrange that. So they did that very thing. And then they found that a good place to place that windmill would be where it is now, on the Windmill Island.
But it is not just an ersatz windmill like some other communities that I know of, Dutch communities that are now building windmills to catch the tourists, that this is a real one for the most part. The parts are original. And it's, I believe, the last one allowed by the Netherlands to go out of the country, too.
And what an attraction when the tulips and Mother Nature agree. We get visitors, and they, that would be you, have a huge impact on this community.
And you'd be amazed to find the number of folks that are business people here in Holland that first came as a visitor to Tulip Time or to go to the state park or other tourism aspects of our area, decided to buy a cottage in the area. They'd bring their families for the summer. Eventually they moved here and started a business here, and now they're employing hundreds of people in the community. It's been a tremendous economic development asset unto itself.
Of course, it's best when everything works just so, but it is a little difficult to schedule nature. The result can be, well, we can't even say it aloud, so we'll spell it.
Stop right now. We don't say that word here. We don't even recognize that word here.
Well, why not? I mean, it can't always be good, can it?
Look at these beautiful tulips year after year. Almost every year.
Every year?
Just about every year.
What happens when it doesn't happen every year?
Celebration still continues. The community comes together and we celebrate our Dutch heritage for 7 days right here in Holland, Michigan.
That's why there's always somebody checking.
Basically, I'm probably a worrier anyway. And when I look at those tulips every single day going back and forth, and I tell my husband or my son or my neighbors, and I'd say, you know what, those tulips are coming out too fast. Or I'd say, oh, they're not coming out fast enough. And every day almost I'd come home. So they called me the official tulip worrier because I'd walk tulip lanes all the time going to school. Here's a good healthy one. You get some warm weather there and it will be up.
And Barb has been just one of thousands of volunteers. After all, most of tulip time is a labor of love. And it's a great way for old and new neighbors to get together. Michael Viola Vu lives and works here now, but he was just another tourist trying to find his way around when he met somebody who was going to be very important in his life.
I met my future wife in Holland, and it's the power of all is the power of love. I follow, and of course I follow on a detour of a mistaken, during the tulip time. Everything became one way in Holland, and if you don't know Holland well enough, you're going to get lost. So, I followed the detour and met my wife and been here ever since.
I'd put on the Dutch costumes in high school, and I'd put on the, the shoes, and I'd do the tulips, and rush down to the tulip and enjoyed it. And when the bands would come marching, I'd go dancing, But I think it's high time that, that the Dutch kind of pay a tribute to African Americans, We are seeing that happen. We're seeing the city of Holland working with us on our Juneteenth festival, a festival that celebrates the freedom of slaves in Texas. And so each year, this is our third year. So I see positive steps being made, and this is the second year where we will have a queen, a Juneteenth queen, riding in the tulip parade. Hoorah!
After so many years during tulip time, it really just kind of made me somewhat excited, happy that every time tulip time came around that I dressed up as a Dutch, and here come a little small little Hispanic man dressed up as Dutch walking along A Street, and my goodness, the first time I wore a pair of wooden shoes, I says, oh my gosh, I wonder if I'm going to be able to stand up on them, Nevertheless, just walked three miles from 8th and Columbia all the way down to Holland High. I made it, and I was pretty much proud of it. I mean, my feet were sore the next day, though, but I was proud. When I look back, and I look at the Holland High School band, and I look at the diversity that each student takes so much pride wearing those wooden shoes. There's Hispanics, Blacks, Asians, and you take a diversity walking along A Street during tulip time. What else could you just look back and just say, what better of a celebration of a diversity when you're really just walking in front of what's behind you, and that is a whole new younger generation that by all means are now celebrating diversity.
I'm going to tell you what, I only used to read about tulip time, and I agree with you, it is a little bit goofy until I saw what it meant to the community. And again, it goes back to that heritage, to the history, to the beautiful Dutch heritage that exists here. It may be goofy, but it's also a very, very beautiful thing. Last year I missed it, I wasn't here, so this will be the first time that I've experienced it. The more I read and became involved with it, I said I want to dive in feet first, and I became a corporate sponsor to Tulip Time.
Underwriters are extremely important to help fund our festival. They have also a sense of pride for being part of this community and supporting this Tulip Time Festival. Tony Castillo from McDonald's, and others like Heinz USA, who's been a longtime sponsor of our Tulip Festival, the Board of Public Works, the Holland Sentinel, and Velders Tulip Gardens. Wonderful. We thank them all.
They and we share this in common. We want you to have a good time. So relax, look, see, taste, try, and enjoy. Because when we say welcome, we really, really mean it.
Willkommen Sie.
Welcome to Holland.
Welcome.
Welcome. Bienvenidos a Holland.
Welcome.
Welcome.
Welcome to Holland.
Welcome, Brendan.
Als je hier in mei komt, dan zie je veel tulpen en dan kun je er echt van genieten en je ziet veel jongens en meisjes in hun klederdrachten. En de tulpen zijn prachtig, net zo mooi als dat je het ziet in het Keukenhof vlakbij Amsterdam.
Bienvenidos a todos ustedes a Holland, Michigan.
Welcome for Holland.
Welcome.
Welcome to Tulip Time.
When the Maytime rolls around, tulips grace the ground. Lovely colors everywhere make the town look fair. Now we wish you'd lend an ear to hear what we've to say. For in Holland every year it's tulip time in May. Oh, we greet you each and every one at tulip time. Come and join us, enter in the fun at tulip time. For we scrub the streets so clean and neat with our brooms. See the quaint Dutch men and women in their costumes. Hear the clumping, all go bumping down the tulip lane. Girls with tulips dance and trip it with this little strain. Milk carts, windmills here for you to see at tulip time. Gardens where good friends just love to meet at tulip time.